She was a woman who laughed loud, loved harder, and never, not once, missed a Sunday call with her mother. Nancy Guthrie wasn't the kind of person who disappeared. She was the kind of person you noticed the moment she walked into a room, warm eyes, steady voice, the type of woman who remembered everyone's coffee order and genuinely meant it when she asked how you were doing. And then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, she was simply gone. No goodbye, no warning, no trace. Her car was still in the driveway, her phone still on the kitchen counter, her coffee mug, half full, sat right on the edge of the sink, like she'd just stepped away for a moment and planned to come straight back. But she never did. For weeks, investigators scrambled in every direction. Friends plastered her face across every telephone pole and Facebook group in the county. Her family sat by the phone, barely sleeping, barely eating, holding onto a hope that slowly, painfully, began to thin. And then the FBI got involved. A seasoned profiler, decades of experience reading the darkest corners of human behavior. Someone who had seen cases like this before and knew, almost immediately, that something far more calculated was at play here. What he uncovered didn't just explain what happened to Nancy Guthrie. It shattered everything her loved ones thought they knew. This is her story, and you need to hear every word of it. Nancy Guthrie came into this world on a cold February morning. Born in a small hospital in rural Tennessee, the second of four children, to a father who fixed engines for a living, and a mother who taught third grade and believed deeply that kindness was the most important thing a person could carry through this world. She grew up in a house that smelled like pine cleaner and Sunday pot roast. She climbed the oak tree in the backyard until she was probably too old to be doing it. From the time she was 9 years old, she kept a journal, filling composition notebooks with her careful, looping handwriting, observations about clouds, about people she'd met, about the things she wished she could say out loud but hadn't yet found the courage for. By the time she reached her 20s, Nancy had built a life that, from the outside, looked exactly like what she'd always wanted. She had a steady job managing accounts for a mid-sized logistics firm. She had a small house with a garden she was genuinely proud of, tomatoes in the summer, chrysanthemums in the fall, and she had a tight circle of friends who described her the exact same way. Every single one of them, reliable, warm, present, her best friend, Darlene, told investigators that Nancy was the kind of person who showed up to your birthday dinner, even when she was exhausted, showed up to your hospital waiting room, even when she barely knew your mother, showed up with soup, with flowers, with a quiet presence that somehow made the hard things feel slightly less impossible. She was not the kind of woman who vanished. That was the part that made it so hard to process, not just for her family, but for the detectives who first caught the case. Because when you're trained to look for patterns, you start with the person. You ask, who was she really? Was she in danger? Was she running from something? Did she leave on her own? And every single person who knew Nancy Guthrie gave the exact same answer. No, absolutely not. Not her. Her mother, Helen, told local reporters that she had spoken to Nancy the evening before she disappeared. They talked for 23 minutes. Nancy had mentioned she was tired, that work had been long, that she was looking forward to the weekend. She said she was going to take a bath and go to bed early. She said goodnight. She said, love you, Mom. And then, sometime between that phone call and the following morning, Nancy Guthrie was quietly, completely taken from the life she had built with a precision that would take months and the involvement of federal investigators to even begin to understand. The first officer on the scene that Tuesday morning was a 26-year-old deputy named Marcus Webb. He would later say in interviews that the call didn't sound urgent at first. A wellness check, dispatched after Nancy's co-worker flagged that she hadn't shown up for a 9 o'clock meeting and wasn't answering her phone, which, for Nancy, was apparently the equivalent of someone else running through the streets screaming. She was never late. She always answered. Deputy Webb pulled into her driveway at 10:47 a.m. and the car was there. The front door was locked, but unlocked through the back, which wasn't normal. Her neighbors confirmed it right away. Nancy always locked the back door. Always. He walked through the kitchen and felt the wrongness of it immediately. Everything was in place. No signs of forced entry. No overturned furniture. No broken glass. The coffee mug on the sink. A dish towel folded neatly on the counter. Her reading glasses sitting on top of a paperback novel on the coffee table, as if she'd just set them down to rest her eyes for a moment, but Nancy wasn't. Her phone, still charged, sat on the kitchen counter, with 3 unread texts to missed calls, and an alarm that had gone off at 6:45 a.m. and simply wasn't dismissed, just silenced by time, by the absence of the person who should have been there to turn it off. Webb called it in immediately. Within the hour, the house was a crime scene. What came next moved fast, faster than most cases of this type, largely because Nancy's employer had connections, because her family was vocal and organized, and because something about the scene felt, to every detective working it, deliberately clean to clean, disturbingly, intentionally clean. Detective Rhonda Calloway had worked missing persons for 11 years. By the time Nancy Guthrie's case landed on her desk, she had seen chaotic scenes. She had seen staged scenes. She had learned, through years of hard experience, the difference between a person who left in a hurry and a person who was removed carefully, methodically, by someone who understood exactly what evidence looked like and exactly how to erase it. This was the second kind. The absence of disruption was itself the disruption. Calloway would later testify. What she meant was this: in genuine voluntary disappearances, people take things. A bag, the charger, car keys, cash, a photo from the nightstand that Nancy took nothing. Her passport was in the drawer. Her emergency fund, $1,200 in a plain envelope tucked behind a row of books, was completely untouched. Her go bag, the small duffel she packed every summer for camping trips with Darlene, was still on the closet shelf. She didn't leave. She was taken, and whoever took her had done their homework. There were no fingerprints on the back door handle, no footprints in the soft dirt beside the back porch, even though it had rained the night before, which should have held impressions easily. No fibers, no hairs, nothing that told a story, except the story of someone who didn't want to leave one. The FBI was contacted for days and within 48 hours of reviewing the case file, Special Agent Thomas Brierly, a profiler with 22 years of experience, said 3 words that reframed the entire investigation. This was planned. Thomas Brierly had worked on over 300 cases involving abduction, stalking, and targeted violence against women. He did not rattle easily. But when he walked through Nancy Guthrie's home on a Thursday afternoon in early October, something settled over him, a quiet, focused dread that he described in private notes later entered into the case file as the signature of a predator who has done this before. He started, as he always did, with the victim, not the scene, the person, because Brierly had learned, over decades, that the most direct path to understanding what happened was to understand who was chosen and why. Predators of this level of sophistication don't operate on impulse. They select, they study, they wait. So who was Nancy Guthrie to someone like that? She was single. She lived alone. She kept a consistent, predictable routine. Same coffee shop every morning. Same parking spot at work. Same Tuesday evening walk through the park near her house. She was trusting. She was kind to strangers. She was the type of person who held the door, who answered when someone flagged her down, who never immediately assumed the worst. She was, in the language of threat assessment, an accessible target. But here was what made Brierly's jaw tighten. She wasn't random. The level of preparation involved, the clean entry, the absence of trace evidence, the precise knowledge of her routine, pointed to someone who had been watching Nancy for weeks, possibly months, someone in her orbit, someone she may have seen, smiled at, and never once suspected, that thought that she likely knew her, abducted at least by sight, changed the emotional temperature of the entire investigation. The FBI's behavioral analysis shifted the investigative focus away from strangers and toward the inner and outer edges of Nancy's life. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, the man who delivered her packages, the guy at the coffee shop who always seemed to be there when she was. Investigators began a quiet, methodical sweep: interviews, surveillance footage, digital footprints, And it was the digital footprint that cracked the silence first. Nancy, like most people, had no idea how much of her daily life she'd made visible without realizing it. Check-ins at the park, photos with location data embedded in the metadata, a neighborhood app where she'd posted about her garden, her weekend plans, her schedule, a digital portrait, precise, detailed, and unwittingly public, that someone had been using as a map. Investigators traced a pattern of account activity, a profile, seemingly innocuous, that had interacted with Nancy's posts, never intrusively, never alarmingly, for almost 9 months before she disappeared. Liked a photo here, commented a single emoji there, invisible in plain sight. But when analysts cross-referenced the account's activity with timestamps, a chilling pattern emerged. Every single time Nancy posted her location in real time, the park, the coffee shop, a friend's neighborhood, that account checked in within minutes. Not hours, minutes. Someone had set up alerts. Someone was tracking her movements through her own words, her own photos, her own unsuspecting digital life. Brierly called it the quietest kind of obsession. And it had been building, silently, invisibly, long before Nancy ever had any reason to feel afraid. The account was traced to a man named Gerald Pratt, 30-9 years old. No prior criminal record. Employed as a mid-level IT contractor who had, at various points over the past 2 years, worked on short-term projects for the same logistics firm where Nancy worked. He had never met her formally. He had no entry in her contacts, no record of a conversation, an email, a crossing of paths in any documented way. And yet when investigators pulled his personal devices, obtained, through a warrant after the digital evidence mounted, what they found was staggering in its scope and its intimacy. Hundreds of photos of Nancy, pulled from social media, screenshotted from live streams, zoomed and cropped from group photos, organized into folders by date, by location, by outfit, notes, detailed, meticulous notes, written in a tone that oscillated between reverence and resentment. Notes about her smile, notes about the men she talked to at the coffee shop, notes about a co-worker she'd had lunch with twice in 1 week. Something that had apparently sent Gerald into a spiral of pages. That he had mapped her life, every corner of it, from the outside, peering in, for the better part of 2 years, and he had never once been noticed. That was perhaps the most unsettling detail of all, not the obsession itself, but how invisible it had been. Nancy lived her life warmly, openly, without the armor of suspicion, and in doing so, she had unknowingly provided everything he needed. Gerald Pratt was apprehended. 11 days after Nancy's disappearance, he was found at a property he had inherited from his uncle, a remote parcel of land 40 miles north, off a logging road that didn't appear on standard navigation apps and required local knowledge to find. Nancy was there. She was alive. The details of her 11 days in captivity have never been fully released to the public, and her family has asked, firmly, that the specific nature of what she endured remain private out of respect for her ongoing recovery. That wish has been honored here. What can be said, what Nancy herself has said, in a limited public statement released through her attorney, is that she survived by focusing on small things: the pattern of light through a gap in the wall, the sound of wind in the trees, the memory of her mother's voice on the phone the night before it all happened, saying goodnight, saying love you, not knowing it would need to carry her daughter through something no one should ever have to carry. I stayed in the small things, Nancy's statement read. I didn't let myself think about the big picture. I just stayed in the next hour. And then the next one. Gerald Pratt was arrested without resistance. He said nothing when the agents approached. His trial, 18 months later, resulted in a conviction on charges of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and stalking. He was sentenced to 37 years. Justice, imperfect and incomplete as it always is, was served. Recovery, Nancy has said, is not a straight line. There were weeks after she came home when the house she had loved felt like a threat, when the garden she'd so carefully tended felt foreign and strange, when the ordinary sounds of daily life, a door closing, footsteps on gravel, a notification on her phone, sent her heart into a full sprint before her mind could even catch up. She saw 3 different therapists before she found one who felt right. She had to relearn, slowly and painstakingly, the basic architecture of trust, trust in spaces, trust in her own judgment, trust in the idea that the world was not entirely made of unseen danger. Her mother moved in for months. Darlene came every week, sometimes twice. They didn't always talk about what happened. Sometimes they just sat together. Sometimes they watched bad reality television and ate takeout and let the simple, steady normalcy of it do its quiet, essential work. What emerged from those months, gradually, tentatively, was something that surprised even Nancy herself. Strength, not the performative kind. Not the kind that gets turned into a hashtag or a speaking tour. The deep, private, unremarkable kind. The kind that means you wake up on a hard morning and get up anyway. The kind that means you walk back into the coffee shop for the first time since it all happened. Order your drink, sit by the window, and simply breathe. That kind of strength doesn't make headlines, but it is, in every way that truly matters, the harder and far more remarkable thing. The FBI's involvement in Nancy's case did something that reached far beyond helping to find her. It exposed a gap, a vast, largely invisible gap, in how ordinary people think about digital safety and the quiet, cumulative ways that an obsessive individual can build a complete map of someone's life, entirely from public information. Agent Brierley, in the aftermath of the case, partnered with a digital safety nonprofit to develop outreach materials specifically aimed at helping everyday people understand what they are inadvertently sharing and with whom. He said, in one interview, that Nancy Guthrie's case was not unusual in its mechanics. What was unusual was that she survived, that the evidence held, and that the legal outcome was what it should be. Most of these cases don't end the way this one did, he said. And the cases that don't, they haunt you. They stay with you. Nancy, for her part, has chosen to stay mostly private in the years since. She still lives in Tennessee, though not in the same house. She still gardens. She still keeps journals. That habit she began at 9 years old has never left her. She still calls her mother on Sundays. She has spoken publicly only a handful of times, and always with the same essential message. She is not a symbol, not a cautionary tale, not a survivor story packaged neatly for public consumption. She is a person. She was always just a person, and she is still here. That, in the end, is the part that matters most. Nancy Guthrie's story stays with you, not because it is extraordinary, but because, in so many quiet, everyday ways, it is not. She was a woman who lived an open, connected, fully human life. She trusted the world the way most of us do, without ever thinking twice about it. And someone exploited that trust in ways she never could have anticipated or prevented on her own. That is the truth that lingers longest. Not the darkness of what Gerald Pratt did, but the ordinariness of who Nancy was before it, and who she has fought, daily and privately, to remain after it. If this story made you feel something, sit with that feeling. Don't rush past it. Think about the people in your life who are quietly carrying things you don't know about. Think about what it truly means to show up for someone the way Darlene showed up, the way Helen showed up, without an agenda and without an end date. And think, maybe, about the small daily choices that add up to a life. The coffee order remembered, the door held open, the Sunday call kept even when you're tired. Those things matter. They are, in fact, everything. If this documentary moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below, not about the crime, but about what stayed with you, and subscribe, because the stories we tell here are always the ones worth remembering.